Hey, welcome to IME Focus Radio. Once again, we are here. And just like any other time, we have another amazing guest. Today, we have a true honor talking to Scotty Aemis. He's going to share with us everything about child trauma. It's something that it can touch a lot of people and a lot of lives. We're going to learn about his experience and what he's been able to do to build new channels for people to pretty much understand what this means and how they can deal with it. So first and foremost, this morning, bright and early, I want to welcome you, Scotty, to the show. How you doing today, sir?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Shemai. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate your time. I know you have a website, you have books that people can get. You have a recent one. Where do we go from here? But before we dive into today's topic, kind of tell people a little bit about your professional life and what got you inspired to study this.
Sure. And I have to be honest with you. I wasn't inspired to study it. It was pushed on me because of life events, which is probably happens to a lot of us. And when we maybe God calls us into that certain area for those people with faith. And in my situation, we had my wife and I had adopted a couple of children from actually an orphanage, a baby home from overseas, and we had just assumed everything would be just wonderful and peachy keen and everything and no issues the rest of our lives. And we were introduced to a rude awakening and realized that, hey, what we thought, everything we thought about parenting was wrong and it was upside down. And we had to find out what was going to happen before we lost our kids. So it was really a part of necessity that drove us in. Prior to that, just a kind of a standard American life. We're from here, from the Philadelphia area, and living large and the whole bit. 76ers fans, and we go from there. But yes, this was a shock, I have to tell you. I was
And not too bad on the 76ers being a fan of that. And I'm an Eagles fan a little bit, so I can say that in Texas, but I like a lot of teams.
So you're the one.
Right? I'm the exception to the rule.
Yes.
But you develop PSR, positive, safe relationships. When you look at that and parenting, kind of explain to the audience what was that you put together and
Sure.
actually what it means.
And actually, just as the prelude to that, it all happened because things had gotten so bad after we brought home our kids, and our natural reaction when our kids were having rejecting our parenting, yelling, screaming, having all kinds of behavior issues, and anybody with that have kids with child trauma or ODD or all these different diagnoses know what I'm talking about. And we had gotten to the point where we were actually in court, child court, where the judge was looking at us and saying, "Are you ready to have your kids taken away from you?" And when that happens, all of a sudden it's like a 2x4 coming right at your head, and you realize, what am I doing wrong? Because we just assumed that, like everybody that grows up, that when a child is disrespectful or poor behavior, the natural reaction is more consequences, showing more authority, do some yelling, more punishment, have incentives, both good and bad, carrot and stick. And none of it worked, and we didn't understand why. And only after that shock of being in court, and as fate would have it, I happened to run in the next day to a friend who had gone through a little bit of the process before herself and was a therapist, and said, "Well, have you ever heard of childhood trauma?" I said, "No." I don't know. I mean, I know what we all think. It's a nice word that we kid around with. And basically she said, no, it's an actual diagnosis. It's an actual brain injury. Because when kids, young kids especially, have that trust between parent and child, or caregiver and child, broken, then all of a sudden their whole brain changes. And so when they interpret things that happen to them, or any events or any conversations, instead of discussing it with what we call the high brain, or the prefrontal cortex, everything goes down to the what we call the reptilian brain, or the amygdala, which everybody, your audience probably knows this expression, fight or flight. Everything is fight or flight because they don't trust you. That that are you taking care of me part of a little baby, a little child has been broken. And so they have to, it's like they have to fight the world on their own. And first understanding that process, that is an actual brain changing of the brain is the first thing to understanding how to change it. And then once we really understood it, once we really got our hands around it, we understood that everything that we had to do going forward was how do we change the brain configuration back to the point where the child can feel safe again from healing. And then through that safety and healing, then they can interpret the world through the prefrontal cortex again, which is the area of reason and consideration and thoughtfulness. And am I doing the right thing and planning and things like that? We learned through a neuroscientist that we work with, a guy named Bruce Perry, a couple of years ago wrote a book with Oprah about the same kind of thing, except for adults. And we learned that everything is about regulation, because when a child goes into this heightened state of anxiety and upset, it's called dysregulation, right? So how do you get them back into a regulated state? And too often what we do is we put them in situations over and over and over again where they get dysregulated. Your audience will know that kids who get on the bus, it's like wild, wild west on a school bus. And then they get into the school and there's 500 kids in that elementary school and there's 25 to 30 kids in a classroom and everything's going on and they don't feel safe and they're going to start acting out and the kids are beginning to disrespect them and ignore them and think that things were and they can't make peer connections and then the teacher, because they're trying to control the room, they're not trying to connect with any one student necessarily, wants to discipline them and give them instruction and they send them down to the principal's office and then there's the lunch area, then there's the play area, and then back to school, and then back to the school. No wonder when the kid gets home, he's completely fried, right? And it's just a sad situation. And the next day, and the next day, and then we think we're helping them by putting them into the soccer camp or the basketball camp or the scouts or the church group. But it's the same thing all over again because no one understands what the key to helping a child regulate. And as Bruce Perry would let us know is that it's all through relationships. Relationships will, over time, will help rebuild that trust. And through that trust, they can heal. And through that healing, the brain can change and they can begin to adapt back into a regular life in some way. The only difference between a broken arm and the brain injury is the amount of time it takes to heal. Oftentimes, trauma will take 10, 15 years, not 6 weeks. But other than that, it's the same process. We as parents, we as caregivers have to create this environment where a child can over time heal. And we have to understand what we're doing and how we're doing it and what environment we're putting them in so they don't get re-traumatized.
That point you made about it kind of starts over again. When they come home and they go out the next day or they do another activity, it's just restarting that process. And I want to dive deeper in that because based on your own experience dealing with kids who were dealing with trauma, that's different with someone who has healed from that, right? Because now they're able to make those connections and build those relationships. With your experience, were some signs that you started seeing things click for them, change for the better as they started to heal in that process?
Sure. And a couple of things leading up to that. My kids were specifically had trauma through neglect, but trauma can come in all different kinds of areas. It can be any kinds of abuse. It can be physical. It can be emotional, psychological. I'm from a larger city back east in Philadelphia. There's lots of kids who can't get a decent meal every day. That in itself can create trauma. And two kids can have the exact same experience, and one kid is resilient, doesn't have an effect, and the other kid has a traumatic experience from it. And each child is different. Each child is separate, and each child has to be dealt with on a separate individual level. That's one. Two, what we're trying to do is build into these relationships is you try to build time, the healing through what we call as resilience, right? So all of a sudden, when the next issue comes up, they can handle it. How do you do that? Well, um, in the school that I'm involved with, it's a trauma specific school, for example, for kids, and we have our own schools. We also do training, things like that. It's all about how do you create an environment where the kid feels safe,
Mhm.
and over that time, for example, if a child gets in trouble or is acting up, oftentimes in schools they'll go to the principal's room, or they'll be in the corner or be yelled at. In a trauma area, they'll go to what's called a resolve room, where they can get regulated. And then after regulation, it's called relationship. It's the three R's: regulation, relationship, and then reason. And you talk to the child. So, after he's calmed down and you've built that relationship, then you can talk to him about a little bit. Well, what could we have done better? How could we have done this a little bit better? And then over time, he begins to think about it. And the resilience comes in with coping skills. Some kids love the spinners, or some kids love the rain balloons, or building blocks, or Legos, whatever that a child might need in order that he can feel his system going to overload. And he can then go to another option saying, this is what I do to calm down. That's okay. Whatever it takes. And over time, they learn to build that into the routine. So when that same environmental difficulty comes up, they know how to deal with it. And that's just a repeat and rinse, right? Wash, rinse, and repeat over time, many, many years. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I can deal with that. That's not a big deal. Nothing will happen. The world won't end. And I'm not emotionally wrecked by that event. And they can begin to deal with it. That's how you know it's going to heal, because they over time can feel something coming on. They can divert the feeling into some sort of coping skill, and they can deal with it, and then move on. And that's what we're looking for with children over time. Um, we one of the things we talk about very strongly is that, and this is really important, that consequences don't work. And that doesn't. Everybody would say, well, consequences. Of course, we're all built on consequences. You do something, you either get an incentive or you get a penalty. But with kids with trauma, you have a situation where, because they don't trust you, they don't trust your consequences, and so
Yeah.
it's a waste of time, it's a waste of effort. So we get away from consequences, and everything is through building that relationship again. Through that relationship, they can then rely on you, they can become attached, and through attachment they feel safe. Through safety they can deal with the world. It's a simple formula that's really hard to do. That's one of
Right.
the key things. The other thing we tell people, parents especially, and grandparents and caregivers, you can't fix your kid. You can't fix them. So don't try. What you can do is you can create an environment for them where they can heal over time. Don't try to fix them, because it's not about you. It's about them. And if you let them heal over time, they will, because kids want to improve, and the brain will improve naturally if you can take away all that negative stimulus in their life. And so for us, what we had to do is we had to cut a lot of the sports events. We even had to cut a lot of the family events. A lot of times you have the big picnics, or the family get-togethers, or the Thanksgiving dinners. That's too much stimulus for these kids. So what you do is you say, hey, we're just not going this year, or we'll come early and leave early, or come up with some plan that works, with a focus on how can we keep things calm and easy and chill for our kids. And that's called the creating the environment. And the PSR is positive, safe relationships. So everybody that they relate to, they want to be able to have a positive feeling. They want to feel safe, and in that environment, they can grow and heal.
This is We Focus Radio, talking to our guest today, Scotty Aemis, and we're talking about childhood trauma. When you look at the ways you were able to navigate this with your own real life experience, it wasn't like you read it from a textbook. It was something you had to develop as you kind of reflect and evaluate, the process and the progress with your kids. Looking back, what are some of the things that maybe parents might find themselves have to personally deal with? Because on one hand, you're helping someone who's in need, but on the other hand, you're probably going through it as well, because you either might feel pressure or you might feel overwhelmed at certain points, because like you said, you can't just fix them. You have to set up environments that kind of introduce them into a world where they can actually process and heal.
Well said. So the some of the key areas that we tell parents, first one is that there's hope, because so many parents who are in a situation that we were in feel hopeless. Like, I'm going to go through my life like this. I can't wait to get rid of my kid at 18. I can't deal with it. My life is ruined. I want first thing message I want to let them know is there is hope. There is a way out. There is a way to proceed if you're willing to take it. And I want to hand that out, because our kids oftentimes have lots of diagnoses: the ADHD, the ODD, which is the defiance, and all other kinds of diagnoses. Oftentimes they're on all kinds of meds and things like that, and you wonder if all these meds are going to change my child and ruin my child and things like that. For short term, for behavior purposes, just to live life, maybe you need to consider it. But a couple of the keys that we always tell parents, especially things, a lot of these kids aren't really set for public school. It's really difficult for them to handle all the stimulus at them. If there's alternatives, look for them. Almost all these kids have what's called an IEP, Individualized Education Program. Really work to get one for your child, because that way you can build in a lot of these tactics we're talking about. If you can't get a separate school like my kids got at a trauma school, you can build it into the public school and try to create this environment for them there as best they can. Another key thing is the care and the counselors and the therapists. Our kids have a right to have all these PT and OT and speech therapy and all, because they need it. Because what happens when the brain is in this fight or flight mode, it also stops the brain and the child from learning, because they're in constant worry that the world's coming in on them. So they get behind with the kids. They need all these counselors. But what happens is we apply to these counselors and these therapists, but they don't necessarily therapists on trauma. They might be for kids on the spectrum. They may be kids from some other specialty. And so we have this tendency to want to listen to them because they're therapists and they must know what they're talking about. And in our situation, we probably had 4 different therapists with 4 different prescriptions and 4 different ideas, and we ended up going nowhere because we were deferring our role as parental caregivers to them and the counselors at school. Oh, they know what to do. We're in charge. The first thing I tell our parents is that parents and grandparents and caregivers is that you're in charge. And if a child is in trauma, everybody that deals with your child has to understand trauma and has to be signing on to your program. They're great. They're necessary people, but they're like accountants and lawyers, right? They respond to you. You don't listen to them. That's one. And then once you have a whole team who are all focused on one area of, hey, this is how we're going to proceed. We're going to create this environment. We're going to create this positive, safe relationship. Then everybody's contributing, and it's like all of a sudden we're moving forward again. That's one of the main things I really talk to our parents about. That getting that IEP, getting the special insurance so they can health. They're all entitled to usually some sort of special health insurance. It makes it easier on them, depending on the state that you're in. And so I guess that would be one of the key things I would do. And then the other thing is, because we're talking about relationships here, right? We as parents and caregivers naturally are the authority, and our kids want us to be the authority. But authority is given. It's not taken. It's not positional. It's not power. Too often we miss that up with authoritarianism, where we're in charge and you're going to do what I tell you to do, and if they don't, we're going to yell. We're going to penalize. We have to understand that's not the program what we're talking about when we're developing relationships with a child. It's all about developing enough love and care where that child wants you to take care of them, wants you to guide them, and wants you to lead them to the right direction. So that always has to be a thought in the back of our mind. Are we doing this out of power, or are we doing this out of relationship? Those are a couple of the keys that I refer to our parents on this. And of course, if your parents want to read more about this, we have a website. We're up on Facebook and Instagram, and we connect any way we can to support anybody out there that needs support as well.
You listen to me, folks. Radio, talking to our guest today, Scotty Aemis, and about childhood trauma. Uh, before we move on, you mentioned website for our listeners and viewers. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit uh, about your resources and what's the website address.
Sure. So our website is childtraumasherpa.com or ctsherpa.com. And the idea behind the word Sherpa is that we walk with you. We're not telling you what to do. Because every child and every parental situation, every grandparental situation is different and unique. And there's lots of information and blogs and ideas up there for people to share. There's we even have a therapist available to talk to or listen to, first time free if they want to call in or set an appointment. And that website, we also have a group on Facebook that is specifically focused on, working with each other, giving each other ideas, suggestions. And again, it's just under Child Trauma Sherpa for both Facebook and Instagram. And we're here to share and help any way we can.
Last thing I want to touch on before we wrap things up is everyone, whether it's parents or their children, they're gonna have good days, they're gonna have some bad days. For children who had to overcome trauma, how have you been able to address and deal with situations where they might feel triggered or have a flashback to a point where they were not so great? And how do you deal with that without being overwhelmed and not allowing them to kind of go back to ground zero, but continue the process to understand that you might get
Yeah.
triggered, but we can get through it.
And it's a great question. And I would say might get triggered. I would change that to will be triggered, because this is not something that is a straight line. It's a very jagged line. And a lot of this is about how we change as well. We as caregivers change. It's not just helping our kids change, but we need to change. I know in our purposes, if we focus on those three R's again, that the first thing we always working on is regulation. The child is dysregulated. They're not going to get regulated if we become dysregulated, right? If they're yelling, we're yelling, they're going to yell more, and we're going to yell more, and it's just going to get worse. It's really hard. For those people who of faith, it might be helpful. I always think of it in terms of, we're none of us are perfect either, and we're making mistakes every day, and we're forgiven every day. And if we can, and all we're asked to do is share that same concept with our neighbor, right? And so if we can think of it in terms of our child, the children that are in our care, we're going to have bad days, and we're going to fail sometimes too, and
Yeah.
we're going to get upset because we're going to get our buttons pressed. But we can get reset, get thinking back to the relationship, and little things like, if a child gets really upset, maybe we want to yell at them. Maybe they did something while we were cooking or making dinner, and we want to send them off into the room. But like, for example, there's no timeouts. You only have a time in. So together you go sit on the couch and get regulated. Then you work in a relationship, and then you say, hey, what could we have done differently? What could we have done better? And that helps both of you regulate, both of you relationship. And maybe, who knows, maybe the child helps you cook the meal, or maybe you go just skip the meal and go have an ice cream or something like that. Because in the end of the day, it's more about the relationship than it is what task did I complete that day. Those tasks, no one will remember in 20 years. But that relationship, if we can develop it, that'll be there forever.
Hmm.
So
That's a great
that,
point right there. That's an excellent point because we can sometimes on the outside looking in, we can just assume versus actually take the time to care and truly understand. Because the only way you can truly understand is if you make that space. It doesn't just happen. You have to be intentional about it. So listening and trying to look through the lens of the other person will help you kind of get more clarity on the situation. So my last question for you, talking about throughout the interview, you are being an advocate for your children and the best interests for them, for our listeners, especially those who are parents. What will you say is something that you feel has helped you as a parent to appreciate more going through all these ups and downs and going through these different processes to better not just your children's life, but your relationship with your children?
That's a great question. And I guess I would answer that by saying it gave me a whole new perspective about what what personally what I felt my life was about. Leading into this process, I think we have a tendency to always think about everything in terms of what's best for me. How can I get a promotion? How can I get further in life? How can I get more fans or clicks or money? And when you're faced with a situation, we realize that you can turn that upside down. And if you're helping other people first, not from a power, not from a is this good for me perspective, but am I helping someone else first? It's amazing how that lifts you up as well. There's a famous author, speaker. I think he's passed away now. A guy named Zig Ziglar. And he said, "You can have everything you want in this world if you first help other people get what they want." And
Hmm.
that kind of turns everything upside down in terms of how you live your day and how you focus. You realize relationships, if you focus on relationships first, everything improves. Everything in your life, everything in your business, everything in your marriage, everything in your churches or sports teams. Relationships are all of a sudden the priority, and the other people, and then that all lifts all boats. So I guess I would use that as we think we're helping our child, but the change in ourselves is really what is happening in the situation.
Be listening, I'll be Focus Radio. We've been talking to our guest today, Scotty Aemis. In his website, like he mentioned before, being the show notes, you can go to childtraumasherpa.com to learn all about the resources he has, the books, everything that he is offering for visitors who visit the website. And for our listeners, want to encourage you to definitely not just check it out, but maybe share it with someone who you feel might gain some value from this. So once again, like always, Scotty, I want to say thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Shemai.